India.
How are they overtaking everyone? Well, they just overtook China for the world population.
Yeah, so I mean, this is one of those videos where they're going to make a lot of bold claims about how they're overtaking everybody, and people are going to repeat a lot of the same talking points in the comments. But we're going to take this,
With a grain of salt.
yeah, we're going to watch it. We're going to take the information, soak it in, and see what we think about it at the end.
If you want to see what we think of India, go to our vlog channel. We went to India.
Yes.
Lots of travel vlogs. Check it out.
So we've seen what it's actually like in India on the streets of South India, Karnataka, which is supposed to be like one of the top nice areas in India. So we know a little bit.
We know a little bit about India. We're not your average Western meat.
Let's do this. Here we go.
There's a reason why the British called India the jewel in the crown. Today, the country is rising from its plundered roots and growing past its colonial history to become one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Past its colonial in the crown. Today, the country is rising from its plundered roots
Malaysia
and growing
or the
past its
US?
colonial history to become one of the fastest
Taking this video with an extra grain of salt now.
Yeah, what is
economies
that?
in the world. But can the world's largest democracy really become the next great superpower? Or is it destined to live in the shadow of China, haunted by its conflicts with its neighboring countries? Let's get right into it. India's economic rise. While the media has been focused on China's massive economic growth, India has been quietly collecting wealth all these years. Maybe there was a reason why a man named Mr. India could turn invisible, because to everyone else, the country might as well have been invisible too. Billionaires like Gautam Adani and Mukesh Ambani are rapidly closing the gap between the US and India. Adani alone has become the third richest man in the world and is very soon going to take over the bald billionaire in net worth. Watch out, Jeff Bezos.
Okay, so this is once again why we're taking this with a grain of salt. They are comparing the wealth of one man or a few men to the wealth of a few men in these other countries and saying this is why India is overtaking everyone, because these people are becoming richer than these other rich people in this other country.
Yeah, the richest people in a country do not represent the wealth or the economic status of a country. Just like saying the U.S., just because the U.S. has however many of the billionaires doesn't mean it's like so much stronger than every other country.
A lot of times when countries have the richest people or the most mega rich people, it means the country has the most wealth inequality. And in the US, the wealth inequality is awful. And it seems to be similar to what it is like in India and China.
So is India taking over the U.S. on wealth inequality then?
Maybe.
Is that what they're showing in this video?
In the second half of 2022, India's GDP grew by an absurd 13.8%.
That is a
I'll let
large
you pick your
percentage.
jaw off the floor. These kinds of numbers were just something that only the economic powerhouse of China could produce. Even if this insane number isn't likely to be repeated, India is still on track to see a growth of 7% every year. Its workforce is growing rapidly, and as global supply chains move away from China, India is reaping all the benefits. Last year, the world's biggest democracy overtook the UK to become the world's fifth largest economy, and by 2030, it's expected to be number 3 in the world. If only the British Raj could see this day. But that's not all. If the country continues to grow the way it is today, by 2050, it will overtake the US as well and become the second largest economy.
It'll be
It accounts for
interesting to see if that will happen, because as we see in even places like China, as people become wealthier, like normal people become wealthier, usually they start demanding more worker rights. And when they are paying the workers more, a lot of times it seems like that skyrocketing growth of all the super wealth starts to
And they also tend to have less babies too, and when they start to make more money as well, which also can stunt economic growth as well.
Because I know China after COVID's kind of been slowing a bit. So, and yeah, babies, people having more babies gets more expensive when the cost of things goes up because everyone's making more money. And so it'll be interesting. It's hard to look at numbers of developing countries and be like, yeah, this is going to go on for 30 years, guys. So look at a lot of other places already have slowed down. And it's interesting. The US is also included in that. We're not
Yeah, I mean, like,
praising the U.S., which people assume we are praising the U.S. when we talk about things. The U.S. is in a rough spot.
very rough spot. But if you were to just look at the U.S. numbers right now, you'd be like, oh, well, they're going to be just on the decline forever.
You don't know.
15% of global GDP. On top of that, all permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, except for China, support India's bid to join them, even if they're not thrilled about it. So, how did we get here? What exactly are the things working in India's favor? After all, less than 50 years ago, the country wasn't on anyone's radar. Nobody expected it to become this much of a powerhouse. But before continuing, if you're liking this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you can stay tuned for the next one. Thank you for your support. Now back to the Indian subcontinent. Why India is winning. India has a lot of things working in its favor. Let's get into the most obvious thing first. India is growing so quickly because it's such a poor country, which means it has massive potential for catching up. Since 1991, the country has undergone massive economic liberalization. Import tariffs and taxes were reduced and markets were deregulated. Cheap labor.
That generally only lasts so long positively as well, as we've seen throughout history. Deregulation and stuff like that generally doesn't work out for the common folk for very long. Labor laws are loosened, people are exploited, and the wealth is accumulated in one area.
The insane economic growth of the U.S. back in the early 1900s was also attributed to partially to cheap labor and stuff like that, and I'm sure that was in China as well. And although it does give you that economic growth, is it good?
I would say most of the countries right now that are like in the developing stage are probably the ones that are protecting workers' rights the most, or potentially the ones that are like bringing in like a lot of the immigrant workers are probably going to have the like higher quality of life, I would think, or at least their citizens. So it's interesting, like more of a European style, where Europeans definitely, they don't have the like fastest growing economies, but usually their quality of life is significantly higher than other countries, like even the U.S. Could say that Europe is significantly higher standard of living than the U.S.
Yes, very true.
And almost guaranteed gains brought in foreign investment like crazy. From 1991 to 2019, India's GDP by purchasing power parity increased by over 770%. Wow. You can try to name any other country that has these numbers. And for India, it's only getting better from here. If the country was already a hub for outsourcing services such as software development and customer service, the post-pandemic has only increased its demand. CEOs are a lot more comfortable with both working from behind a screen and working in another country. Turns out someone did benefit from COVID. For India, it's been a game changer. The number of people employed in India for jobs outside the country is likely to at least double and reach more than 11 million by 2030. Global spending on outsourcing is also going to increase from $180 billion per year to around $500 billion by 2030. Meanwhile, Indians are also migrating to other countries, and they're doing it well. The average Indian household in the US earns twice as much as the average American home, while in the UK, they're the highest earning demographic. Turns out, those stereotypes about them being smart might be true after all.
Once again, that's an interesting point to make, that Indians contributing to other countries somehow means India is overtaking other.
Yeah, it's almost like the Indians that make the most money in India take that money and move out of the country, and then since they already have a head start in the US because they made money in India and they have a lot of money, then all of a sudden that's why they make more than the average American.
Indians are smart, but yeah, it seems like the brain drain is still a big thing if they're bragging about going to other countries and becoming successful.
People are bringing in big numbers, but the manufacturing industry is no slouch either. While China's economy is slowing down due to disturbances in production and supply chains, as well as conflicts with the US, India is also in the perfect position to become the production hub of the world.
Map.
And that's
corporate tax cuts, investment incentives, and infrastructure spending are helping to drive investments in manufacturing as well. Foreign investments are pouring in like never before. India's factory has never worked better. The country is also on the route to having 2/3 of its energy needs met completely by renewable sources.
That's
Another
a very
factor playing in
fantastic
its
thing too
favor
about
is just how
developing countries now, like in
Mhm.
2023, they can get ahead on the renewable energy stuff, whereas countries that developed in the 1900s didn't have that.
There wasn't even like renewable energy sources really back then.
So now they have to completely change their infrastructure to be able to catch up with the renewable energy, and that obviously takes a huge hit and a lot of money.
And it's nice that India, I'm sure it's still more expensive to go for the renewable energy, but it's nice that they're still choosing to go for renewable
Yeah,
energy.
it's fantastic. That's a very good job.
huge the country is. India is on the route to taking over the world due to the sheer size of its numbers. They just can't stop making more people. India has recently surpassed China as the most populated country in the world since January 2023. And unlike China, a very large percentage of its population is under 24 years old. Over
Crazy.
50% of its population is below the age of 35. In 2100, its population will exceed China's by 50%. And when most developed countries
No way that pace stays. No way. As if the country is going to continue to develop, that's going to slow.
That's just how it works.
That's just how it works.
Of aging populations, India's window for having a young workforce is expected to last until 2070. An increase in access to labor leads to higher productivity, which then will lead to more goods being produced. It's the perfect recipe for economic success. The Modi government knows this, and they're taking full advantage of all the resources at their disposal. But superpowers aren't built on economies alone. They also have to have the military might to back up all those numbers. And India has military strength in spades. The Indian military is ranked at number 4 in the world, beating countries like Japan, France, and even its previous overlords, the British. Its defense budget is the 3rd largest in the world. As the economy increases, more and more money pours into tanks and guns. Meanwhile, India is on the slow yet steady
It'd probably
path
be pouring
to
into
completely
other
modernizing
facets,
its military,
like the
while
US.
also starting to become self-reliant with the release of its own weapons and vehicles. For example, the
We always have a lot to say about the military, but like once again, we're making a lot of comparisons to the U.S. The U.S. puts way too much money into the military and lack social programs that other developed countries have. India seems to be going that same route, which is not a good thing.
No. It'll be interesting to see what they decide to do.
Arjun main battle tank line. If you take
You would
India's
hope that the
nuclear
world
assets
would
into
move towards
account, it's
a
safe
point
to
where
say
we
it has the
wouldn't
military aspect
need
covered
as
too.
big of militaries because
Of
we're all
course,
so
it's not
connected
all
now.
sunshine
But
and roses in good old Mother India. It has its fair share of issues that it has to deal with if it wants to continue on this track.
there we go.
The
This should be interesting.
problems. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty. The most obvious of the problems is that India's infrastructure isn't enough to keep up with what it wants to do. Of course, the government is taking steps to bring it up to the standard. For example, the $90 billion Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor is a mega project that will build rail lines, airports, highways, and mega cities. After its completion, the country is planning to build more corridors between Amritsar, Delhi, and Kolkata, as well as Mumbai, Bengaluru, and Chennai, forming a quadrilateral border around India where massive development will be taking place. The country is also pouring billions of dollars into improving its existing transport infrastructure and ports, as well as into building new smart cities, for example, the Gift City, to attract new investors.
Wow.
But there's a
It's so
far
cool to
worse
see
problem
that
the country
India
facing.
is spending hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure too. Once again, the US, like, it's hard. Like, the politicians that want infrastructure spending have to fight and fight and fight and fight and fight for it. It's hard to have the government vote on, guys, our roads are falling apart. Let's fix them.
That's one of the reasons you always see the videos like, oh, why China is so much more modern or so much better than the U.S. It's because their infrastructure is so much more modern and updated than the U.S. infrastructure.
For a developed country, the U.S. has one of the worst infrastructures in the world. It's like not good. Like the rating on it, I believe, was like a D on like a grading scale, which is not good. And the government refuses to spend money because they want to keep filling the pockets of the corporations that pay to put them in office generally. So
it's nice that India is investing in the infrastructure because it's very important.
Very important.
And it will prove a lot more difficult to solve. India needs to deal with its poverty crisis.
That is true.
While massive economic growth looks good on paper, all it takes is a trip down to India to see just how unequally that new wealth is spread.
Like we mentioned
Right next to
earlier.
Mukesh Ambani's 27-story house, people are dying of extreme poverty in the slums. It's pretty dystopian if you think about it. Meanwhile, the pandemic has
That
thrown
house is
tens of
nuts.
millions of Indians into extreme poverty. A very big reason for this is the lack of jobs. Having such a large workforce doesn't mean much if so many of them are unemployed. Educated young people have nothing to do and are battered by soaring inflation. And while we're on the topic of education, its lack of availability to the lower classes is another sore spot for the country.
There's that wealth
Millions don't get the
inequality
opportunity
we're
for
talking
quality
about.
education, meaning so many people who could have contributed to the country never get the chance to do anything at all. As the gap between the upper and lower classes grows wider and wider, the middle class is disappearing. And if that happens, India's economic machine will stop. The government has focused on tangible infrastructure, but they can build road after road. As long as the social infrastructure isn't improved, India will never be able to get out of the slums of the world. Conclusion: India is on the fast track to becoming an economic and military powerhouse. Pretty soon, we'll be seeing a shift from a Western to a multipolar global society with India as one of its leaders. The world's largest democracy has all the right cards to be able to become the next great superpower of the world. However,
The way
it
that
has
he
to
came
deal
up
with
on
its
that
existing
elevator.
problems
Very
before it's able to get
concert-esque.
anywhere close to achieving its dreams. Do you think India will be able to achieve what it wants
Interesting.
to? Comment below to let us know.
It is
If
interesting.
you
They're
enjoy-
in the point where, like you said, if they play their cards right, they could go very well. But it all comes to investing in the right things, making sure corruption can stay out of the government, making sure corruption can stay out of anywhere, making sure that even if there's no corruption in the government, that the people in the government are making the right choices for the people.
It's reminiscent to U.S. history, and obviously that's what India is trying to go for, to be the next superpower, the next big economy. But the U.S. was it was like a roller coaster of corruption, and then kind of weeding out the corruption, and then the corruption coming back, and now we're kind of back to that corruption point, and the U.S. seems to be in the worst state it's been in a while.
It's very interesting to see how this can play out, because this India and other nations in South and Southeast Asia seem to be they will be the next kind of rising powers. So
Yeah.
they will set the precedent for what is next in the world, I would imagine.
Interesting to even predict, because the world is so different with just the rise of the internet and instant
Yes.
connectivity with everybody around the world, like how going forward, even how superpowers will even matter. I mean, somehow so many of the countries in Europe, which are not even close to the size of India or countries like that, still have so much influence and so much power. I mean, like a little country like Belgium has a lot of influence in the world.
That's probably the most the smallest, most influential country. So
It's great. Or Korea. Korea is not like a super large country, and I mean their social influence around the world and their companies just
their cultural influence is spread rapidly,
everywhere.
and that's all from media.
The world is a lot different than it was. So maybe military might and just I don't know, just manufacturing jobs and stuff might not make you the big superpower anymore. Because I mean, America seems to be slowly losing that superpower status. And I mean, it'll be interesting in the future to see how, when superpowers fall, the way they react to that in today's
Yes.
world. Because back in history, sometimes they would try to seize that power back militarily or something like that. So I don't know.
Lots to see in the world.
I'm sure this is a very controversial video for some of you to actually see a reactor nitpicking some of and giving actual opinions and insight about things, and not just being like, what?
No way, they're modern,
Guys.
And that is partially because we went there.
We did. We saw what India's like. We know what it's about, and it's a fun place to go. We really
It is
enjoyed
fun.
it.
We're going back soon, hopefully.
The people there are very friendly, and yeah, hopefully we'll be going back soon. And you guys can come with us. Check out the vlogs on the vlog channel, and thanks. Keep it real in the comments, guys.
Yeah, don't hate on us, and don't associate us with our identity as Americans. Although we come from the country of America, we do not represent its beliefs.
We've barely lived there in the last 2 years.
Yeah. So, thanks for watching.
See you in the next one. Bye.